Everyone is treating the Alex Pereira vs. Cyril Gane fight as the obvious secondary story on the White House card. The assumed appetizer before the main event. The fight where the narrative writes itself. Pereira moves up, Pereira finishes someone, Pereira becomes a three-division champion, everyone applauds. And that assumption is wrong. Not because Pereira cannot win. He absolutely can. But because Cyril Gane is one of the most genuinely difficult stylistic problems that exists at heavyweight, and the specific version of that problem, a man who is faster than most light heavyweights, who moves in and out of range like a cat, who has shown championship-level striking material, who has grappling credentials that almost nobody talks about, is precisely the version of opponent that exposes the way Pereira fights. This is not a safe fight. This is one of the riskiest matchups that could have been constructed for Poatan at this moment in his career, and the people who have studied it closely are not as comfortable as the casual narrative suggests. Start with the foundational question that shapes everything about this fight. What does Pereira actually look like at heavyweight? The honest answer is that we do not fully know yet. We have sparring footage. We have the physical reality of a man who has been making 185 pounds for years, a weight that was genuinely difficult for his frame, and who now arrives at a division where he does not have to punish his body to make weight. The optimistic version of this is that a fully hydrated, fully recovered, naturally sized Pereira is a physically superior version of the fighter we have watched throughout his UFC career. The concerning version is that moving up in weight classes does not automatically translate to maintained speed, maintained power translation, and the same ability to impose his physical game on opponents who are now legitimately larger and stronger. Tom Aspinall talked about this. The size advantage Pereira had at middleweight and light heavyweight, being one of the biggest men in those divisions, is gone at heavyweight. He is no longer the physically imposing presence. He is the smaller man. And fighting as the smaller man changes things in ways that cannot be fully predicted from training footage alone. The Cyril Gane problem is worth breaking down in detail, because the surface-level version of this fight, striker versus striker, Pereira's power against Gane's technique, misses the most important elements entirely. Gane is not a standard heavyweight striker. He is a hybrid. He moves laterally with the kind of fluid, explosive footwork that most heavyweights simply do not possess. He can get in and out of the pocket faster than opponents expect, fast enough that Tom Aspinall, the legitimate heavyweight champion, a man with elite striking himself, was having genuine problems figuring out the timing before the fight ended in a controversial eye poke. That movement creates a specific problem for Pereira, whose offensive system is built around the calf kick as the setup weapon and the left hook as the primary finisher. The calf kick works by slowing down an opponent's movement, disrupting the footwork, creating the hesitation that makes the left hook land. Against a man who moves as fast and as continuously as Gane, getting the calf kick to land with the required consistency to degrade that movement is a harder proposition than it has been against any previous opponent. There are two versions of Cyril Gane, and which one shows up at the White House determines everything about how this fight goes. The version that fought John Jones was not competitive. He was scared. He wanted out of there from early in the fight, and it showed in every exchange. The fight-or-flight response was real, and it went in the wrong direction. That version of Gane loses to almost everyone in the top 10. The version that fought Tom Aspinall in the first round before the eye poke ended the night was entirely different. That version was moving well, timing well, landing clean shots, making a legitimate heavyweight champion look uncomfortable. That version was showing championship-level material. The question every analyst is asking is which version Gane has trained himself to access consistently, and whether the circumstances of fighting at the White House, a globally broadcast event, the biggest stage the sport has ever created, with the interim heavyweight title on the line, produces the competitor or the fighter who wants out. Pereira's defensive habits are the specific technical vulnerability that makes this fight dangerous in ways his previous matchups were not. He fights with his hands lower than conventional wisdom recommends. He accepts damage to deliver damage. His philosophy is built on the premise that his power is the great equalizer, that if he lands, the fight ends, and the risk of absorbing shots on the way to landing is acceptable. Against middleweights and light heavyweights, that philosophy has generally worked because the power differential between Pereira's strikes and what opponents can deliver back is significant enough to justify the trade. Against a heavyweight who is fast, technical, and accurate, a heavyweight like Gane, the calculation changes. Pereira is no longer the biggest man in the room. The shots coming back have legitimate stopping power. And the sparring footage that has circulated from this camp shows Pereira getting touched more than his fans are comfortable with. That footage should be taken with appropriate context. Sparring is not fighting, opponents behave differently in the gym, and a man of Pereira's caliber has clearly survived and processed enormous amounts of contact throughout his career. But the underlying concern it surfaces is real. His defensive habits that were acceptable at lower weights may require adjustment against a man of Gane's speed and accuracy. The historical reference point that keeps coming up in analyst discussions is the Izzy Adesanya knockout at UFC 281. In that fight, Pereira was dominating. His leg kicks were finding the mark. His shots were landing. He was, by most measures, winning the fight in a way that suggested it was only a matter of time before he finished it. And then, in a moment that happened because he got sufficiently comfortable with his own dominance that his defensive attention lapsed, Izzy found the right hand and the fight was over. The lesson from that knockout is not that Pereira cannot be beaten. Obviously he can. The lesson is that when he gets into a position where he believes the finish is inevitable, his defensive awareness drops in ways that create a window for precise opponents. Gane is a precise opponent. If Pereira finds himself ahead in this fight, processing the situation as one he is about to finish cleanly, and his hands come down slightly, Gane, who does not get hit clean very often, who uses his movement to avoid exactly those moments, is capable of finding the counter. The grappling dimension is the wild card that almost nobody is accounting for, and it deserves serious attention. Gane is primarily known as a striker, and that reputation has led most analysts to frame this as a pure striking contest. But Gane went to Dagestani wrestling camps after the John Jones fight specifically to address the grappling deficiencies that Jones exposed. In the Aspinall fight, despite its abbreviated nature, Gane was showing wrestling attempts and trying submissions, moves that surprised observers who had only seen him as a pure stand-up fighter. If Gane can get this fight to the ground, and the analysts who watched the Aspinall fight closely believe he can, Pereira is in genuinely uncomfortable territory. His grappling at the UFC level has been tested, but never against a heavyweight who has specifically trained to impose a wrestling game. And one analyst made the point that lands as both accurate and darkly funny. If Gane is the first man to successfully wrestle Alex Pereira, the level of hate he receives from the MMA community would be historically unprecedented. It would also mean he is walking out of the White House with the interim heavyweight title. The leg kick question runs in both directions, and it is one of the most interesting tactical elements of the entire fight. Pereira's calf kick is elite. It is one of his signature weapons, the tool that sets up the left hook by disrupting movement. Against Gane, landing it consistently requires solving the footwork problem first. Gane has to be in a position where the kick can find the lead leg, which requires slowing the lateral movement. The complication is that Gane is himself a strong kicker, but his leg kick defense is a documented weakness. Multiple analysts have noted that if someone kicks Gane consistently, his ability to defend those kicks is not at the level of his other defensive skills. Which means this fight has an interesting mirroring structure. Pereira's best setup weapon targets Gane's worst defensive habit, but Gane's movement advantage makes landing that weapon consistently difficult, while Gane's own kicks target a version of Pereira who may not yet have fully adapted his defensive system to heavyweight speed. There is a version of this fight that goes exactly how most people assume it goes. Pereira comes out composed, lands the calf kick in the first 2 minutes to begin disrupting Gane's movement, finds the left hook when the footwork slows, and produces the finish that sends him into the history books as a 3-division champion. That version is real, and it is the most probable single outcome. The problem is that MMA rarely produces the most probable single outcome without at least testing every assumption along the way. Gane's first-round movement, before the calf kick damage accumulates, before Pereira times the footwork, before the physical impositions of sustained combat start to work in Pereira's favor, that first round is where Gane is most dangerous, most unpredictable, and most capable of producing the kind of moment that changes the entire narrative of the fight. One analyst made the point that stuck above everything else in the conversation around this fight. He is not predicting a disaster for Pereira. He is predicting that this fight is much harder than people think, and that underestimating Gane specifically because Pereira has looked so dominant at lower weight classes is the kind of thinking that produces the surprises this sport is famous for. Pereira is an absolute dog, a fighter who believes in his power absolutely, who will walk through damage to deliver damage, who does not have a version of himself that decides it is too hard and chooses a safer path. That quality is real and it matters enormously in a fight like this one. But the best version of Alex Pereira, fighting at the heaviest weight class of his career, against the most movement-sophisticated opponent he has faced at any weight class, that version is still being constructed. And the White House is where it either emerges fully formed or gets tested in ways that require a different kind of response. The pick is Pereira, because his finishing ability across multiple weight classes, his elite calf kick system, and his absolute conviction in the trade-offs his style requires all point toward a fight he eventually controls. But eventually is doing a lot of work in that sentence. The first round belongs to Gane's movement. The question is whether Pereira can solve it before Gane solves him.